and welcome to Cultcast. My name is Valija Amir, and I'm an English Lit major at Bilkent University, and I'm hosting Exploring Ethnicities on behalf of the Culture Studies Society. So, my main aim with this podcast is to sit with students from campus, or even faculty members at some point, hopefully, and talk to them about the circumstances that help them explore their ethnicity or identity in general. So, for a bit about myself, so the listeners can also feel a bit familiar with what we're doing here, a lot of my research work and projects over the last 2 years have revolved around post colonial theory and feminist theory. And I mostly work with comparative literature in this, where I'm trying to bring in aspects of media and culture with literature. So I've also done some research work in political science. So if anyone listening wants to come in and be a part of the podcast or speak about any of these topics with reference to identity or ethnicity, and if you end up listening to the end of the podcast and this seems like something you want to be a part of, please send us a message over on our Instagram, which is at cultbilkent. Okay, so my guest for the first episode is Eje. I would love to introduce her, but I'm gonna let her do that because I could talk about her for a very long time.
Oh,
So, Eje, please tell us a bit about yourself.
okay. Hello, I'm Edja, and I'm also an English Lit student at Kent University. If I were to talk about my ethnicity, I'm not very connected to my roots, unfortunately, but my mom's side, um, my grandfather on my mom's side, are Abaza Circassians, and then my dad also has roots in Caucasus Mountains, the mountains of Caucasus. Yes.
Yeah, that reminded me I didn't actually introduce what I am.
Oh.
So, for the people listening, I'm from Pakistan, but we're not really going to get into my ethnicity. I'm just here to help people. But why don't you also talk a bit about maybe your major, what kind of research work, if you do something like that, what kind of work you've done, maybe just a bit about your interests in general.
Okay, well, I'm interested in communication, and I obviously like literature, which is why I'm studying it. But yeah, I also have an interest in gender studies and things like that. So yeah, any sort of theories on gender or minorities as well. Um, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned a bit about your ethnicity, and I'll ask you to maybe elaborate on that a little bit, but we're going to start with the basics. So, first, why don't you said you weren't that connected to it.
Yeah.
So, why don't you walk me through how you grew up, or at least how you remember culture and ethnicity influencing the way you grew up? And I can talk a bit first if you want.
Okay.
So, for me, I didn't really think about ethnicity, identity, and culture that much because in Pakistan, I think our ethnicities are generally just a big part of how we grew up, anyways, in the practices that we have in general, our community, family, and even the way we're raised, both with and out of religion, but mostly with religion. And growing up and also moving out for uni was a really big thing for me because it completely took me out of that community and society that I'd known for my entire life and put me in somewhere entirely foreign. So it was kind of like suddenly I had none of the background that I'd grown up with or nothing that had supported me throughout my life. And that's kind of how I started realizing the difference in atmosphere and what cultural practices can actually do for you as a person, like how they can support you in your daily life. So for example, the biggest sort of maybe like a missing hole that I can think of when I'm here is during Bayram. In Turkey, I think the celebration culture of Bayram is not the same as back in Pakistan, and we've talked about this a bit, I think, in the past. But back home, it's almost like an event in the sense that, you'd wake up early in the morning, the men are gonna go for like the Eid prayers, the women they're gonna start making like special dishes, desserts, and the kids are gonna dress up and everyone's gonna sit down together. You'll go visit different family members, and it's like a whole day of just celebration. But when I came Here, it was just me alone in my dorm room, and I kind of didn't have any family or something like that to connect to or to celebrate with. And that, I'd say, was the first time that I realized the emphasis on community and also how big of a part food is in culture, let's say. So, if I reflect that back onto you, when you think about the way you grew up, or maybe even something as simple as, traditional food was in growing up, what can you think of?
Okay, so I didn't really know anything about my roots until I think late middle school. Um, I guess the way I grew up was very much just the way any Turkish child grows up here. So yeah, all the food that we ate, it was all just very Turkish. But some of the dishes my mom made, I guess I'd never really questioned where it was from. uh, the time I distinctly remember ethnicity being mentioned was when I was in middle school, I think seventh or eighth grade, and the Turkish students, we were kind of talking amongst ourselves about our roots. It's a common thing in Turkey to ask someone which city you're from. So we were kind of talking about that, and then some of my friends who also have uh, minority or ethnic roots um, mentioned their roots, and then I kind of just remembered my mom saying, "Oh, like we're Circassian." I had no idea what that meant, but I was like, "Oh, okay, I guess I'm Circassian, whatever that means." And then I said that, and pretty much no one knew what it was. Uh, and then there was a girl I was friends with, and she said, "Oh, like in Turkey we have this thing called Çerkez tavuğu, which is like Circassian chicken,
Okay.
which is a dish that we have, but I guess that's just something people associate with it." So she said, "Oh, like Circassian chicken," and I was just really confused because I also hadn't had that chicken at the time. So I was like, I don't really know what this is, but I guess I mean that's something. No one else knew what it was, and she knew the chicken. So that was pretty much that experience that I had. Um, and then it was only after my grandfather passed away that we started talking more about him with my mom, and she would tell me stories about him and also his side of the family. Back when they used to visit, there was one distinct time I remember when my grandfather's sister cooked traditional food for us, and her family is very much tied to their Circassian roots because she's also Abaza like us, but then her husband's Adiga Circassian, and they are, for what I know, a larger population of Circassians, and they're very connected to their roots. And because they're both Circassian, it's like their whole family is pretty much, but my grandmother isn't. And so that was the first time that I ate food knowing, oh, this is from like their culture, you know.
Yeah.
And so yeah, talking more with my mom about my grandfather, and just I became curious to know more, but I kind of didn't know where to start. I remember I just picked up a lot of books from the Bilkent University Library when I first started studying here, and it just seemed like a lot of information. So yeah, pretty much all I know is the information I read very briefly, and then talking to my mom and learning about my grandfather from my grandma as well, and all of that. So yeah, I guess that would sum it all up.
Yeah, that's great. So when you think about the way that maybe entering uni, or let's say, was there a difference in how you interacted about this back in high school and then maybe in uni? Do you think things change, or like how were people's perceptions in general? Does something like that come to mind?
Yeah, I think, well, in high school, I definitely didn't know that much about it. Like I said, after my grandfather died, I kind of started getting more interested in it. But that interest only resurfaced after I started university because our library is amazing.
Yeah.
And I would just spend a lot of time during my breaks just browsing the books. And I stumbled upon some books that were about Circassian history. And when I saw those, I kind of decided that, there are more resources here that I could look into. But again, because it just felt really daunting,
Yeah.
I didn't know where to start. And I read some of them, but again, it doesn't feel enough. And I always felt like, oh, I should learn more. But I don't know where to start. So maybe it would be nice to reach out to more relatives or something. That's what I always think. But nowadays, I feel like with the maturity level of people as well. I mean, when I was in high school, if I told people I was sarcastic, that didn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
Nowadays, if I do, people at least know what it is. I mean, people in my age group, older people, if I told them, um, they would get that. And then I have also met people who are also Circassian, or they have Circassian roots. And so most Circassians that I have met are Adige, but that's I don't know how it's pronounced in English,
That's
but
fine.
that's different from Abkhazian, which is, oh, I realize I've been saying Abkhaza, but that's like the Turkish
Oh,
pronunciation.
that's okay.
Yeah,
That's okay.
Abkhazian. Like me, I haven't met any other Abkhazians, and I didn't really know the distinction until a short time ago. So yeah, that's what I would say. I mean, there definitely isn't a negative stereotype uh, against Circassians in Turkey. No, a negative. Well, there aren't.
Perception,
Yeah,
maybe.
negative
Yeah.
perception. That's what I mean. Because I mean, anytime anyone has asked and I've told them, it's always been received in a positive light. I think it has to do with our roots because, from what I know, um, well, I could go into like the
You
history
can. You
just a little
absolutely can.
bit,
Yeah.
but um, long time ago, during the Ottoman Empire, and Circassians and all those ethnic groups, Abkhazians, Adiga, they're all kind of from the north, the mountains of Caucasus. That's where most of them lived. Very cold and just northern, you know.
Yeah.
And the uh, Russia invaded the Caucasus Mountains, and essentially all the groups and all the people that lived there had to kind of fight to um, keep living there. But obviously, Russia was very strong, and then at one point, um, the people had to flee, from what I know, and then the Ottoman Empire kind of um, allowed them in. And from what my father told me, the Sultan at the time, his mother was Circassian, so he had more levels of empathy, I guess. And so he kind of set up these settlements for Circassian people so that they could um, preserve their culture and everything. And also because they were so used to fighting against the Russians, he kind of strategically placed them so that they could fight against Russians if they were to start invading the Ottoman Empire. Uh, but before this, all the times that the Russians invaded Circassians, they essentially carried out a genocide, and they eradicated a large portion of the population. I think online it said somewhere in the 90% range, like
Yeah.
95, 97%. So it says 1 to 1.5 million. That's during the final stages of the war, which is just devastating. But I mean, I don't know that much about how accurate those numbers are, but that's
Yeah.
just what I've read. So yeah.
You talked a bit about negative perceptions, but I also remember us discussing one word in particular
Mm,
and how it translates to Turkish. Do you
yeah.
want to talk a bit
Yeah.
about
So
that?
I didn't know that because I kind of went to international schools, and
Yeah.
I guess it was a different environment than being in a Turkish public school, for example, where I guess people have their own uses of slang words. For
Yeah.
example, we didn't really have those. So the first time I actually heard of this word was the start of this year. But so people, when they ask me what is your ethnicity, I say Circassian because the distinction between Adiga, Abkhazian, and Sistal. I mean, it's pretty similar. People
Yeah.
tend to just group them under Circassian. Um, but I found out that Abkhazian, which in Turkish is abaza, is also slang to mean like sexual arousal, and that is a bummer
Yeah.
because it's just I don't know where it comes from, but it's spelled the same way, it sounds the same. I mean, the only thing that differentiates them is the first letter. If it's uppercase, then it becomes the ethnic group, but if it's lowercase, then it becomes slang. for this thing, which yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
And I'm sure maybe some linguist has traced its origins, and
maybe.
maybe we can look into that. Yeah. And I guess before we move on to like the next couple of questions, would you like to share something of your culture? I mean food, a dish, because I remember you were discussing
Yeah.
something. Is there something about that that you'd like to share with people?
Well, I mean, there's several dishes. I really think that we have some amazing food that more people need to try. And like I said, growing up, we would eat these things, but
Yeah.
I never really knew where they were from. I mean, my mom, she's a great cook, and she would cook different food from different parts of Turkey all the
Yeah.
time, but I wouldn't really question it. I mean, sometimes even now, if I show people something my mom makes, they have no idea what it is.
Ah.
I'm like, oh, this is just from this region of Turkey. It's just things that she's picked up.
Yeah.
So she would always be making interesting dishes that I wouldn't see any of my friends eating,
Yeah.
but I never questioned their roots or anything. But I did find out that she used to make something called hinkal, which is kind of like a vinegar dumpling with
Oh.
cream with like meat inside, and it's just the best. The vinegar is just it's really good. And we have haluj, which is like a type of burek or like stuffed pastry.
Okay.
And then the Circassian chicken I mentioned is, I guess, probably the most common food or the most
Okay.
well known Circassian food.
In
And
Turkey?
yeah, in Turkey. I feel
Okay.
like if you ask a Turkish person what is a Circassian dish, they would say Circassian chicken,
Okay.
because it kind of got, from what I know, adopted into the culture during Ottoman times, and
Okay.
so it became a lot more widespread. It
All
went
right.
kind of outside of just the groups that were Circassian.
So you mentioned a bit about the Circassian chicken, but like, okay, so I don't know what it is. I don't think I have ever tried it. So what is it,
Yeah,
basically?
okay. So, I feel like this is what most Turkish people would associate with Circassian cuisine,
All right.
because it kind of became widespread during the Ottoman Empire after Circassians came to Turkey. So it's definitely something a lot more people know about. So it's made of boiled chicken that's shredded, and then they make a paste with walnuts that are
Oh,
crushed,
whoa.
and then stock. But the important feature is also that there is stale bread that they put into it.
Oh.
So it's just like a very mixed. I really like the textures, and I have only had this one time when my grandfather's sister made it, but she made a really good Circassian chicken. And then the final food I can talk about is kaçamak, which is a type of maize porridge. And I feel like a lot of different cultures have this because it's so easy to make. Even in Turkey, um, I think I'm pretty sure the Black Sea region kind of has
Okay.
their own versions of this as well. It's essentially just made with cornstarch and butter, and then some meat in it. And it's from the wartime because you can make it with all the ingredients that you have, and a lot of cultures, from what I know, have similar dishes they make
Yeah.
during wartime or when things are hard. So those are some of our
Okay. Well,
dishes.
thank you for talking about that because personally, I think that food is maybe like the main, this is just my personal opinion. I think food is the main carrier of culture, but also
Yeah,
it's one of the biggest things that brings communities together because any sort of interactions and things would generally happen over food
yeah,
if
during
that's the right.
mealtime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um I think one other thing that just I remembered right now is when we or like you were talking with your mother, she mentioned something about general cultural differences that
Oh
would come
yeah,
between like Turkish culture and then like Circassian culture.
yeah. Yeah, okay. So this is actually really interesting to me because essentially this was also something I read about when I was reading the books that I got from the library. Um there was always an emphasis on gender equality, and this also directly relates to my areas of interest, so it's great. Gender equality was an important factor for Circassians. So uh essentially men and women were always seen on the same level. And my mother told me, for example, that my grandfather in the 1950s, so horseback riding was also a huge part of Circassian culture, and
Yeah.
he would ride a horse often. And he was able to, wear his leather jacket and get on his horse and go pick up his girlfriend and take her out dancing, which is not something a lot of, I feel like, Turkish teenagers could have done back in
Yeah.
the day, because it just wasn't seen as appropriate for a girl to go out dancing with her boyfriend and ride on his horse.
Okay.
So, but because they were just both from Circassian families, it was a perfectly normal thing. And apart from that, we definitely have a huge level of respect culture in Turkey in general, but it's mainly geared towards our elders. But my mom told me that in Circassian culture, um, there's also a lot of respect for children. So even if a child walks into a room, for example, they would stand up, or I guess Circassian
Oh,
families
wow.
still. So yeah, there's the same level of respect for all age groups, which I
Yeah.
think is really nice.
I think that's quite rare, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned your grandfather
Yes.
used to ride horses, and I
Yes.
also remember you mentioning that it's was one of your favorite sports, maybe
Oh
horseback.
yeah, I did. Yeah.
Did you know that your grandfather used
I
to?
actually did not. I found that out today.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess I knew that he spent time with horses because it's one of my most prized, or like, I guess, possessions that I um like the most is a ring that was passed down from my grandfather, and it has the this kind of decoration that they used to put on horse saddles and
Mhm.
also in their hair. It's just like a
Oh,
little
wow.
cultural, uh,
Artifact.
yeah, kind
Yeah,
of. And he kind of had that made into a ring to give to my mother, and then she passed that down to me.
that's great.
And so I knew he kind of spent time with horses, but I didn't know he had his own horse. I didn't know he rode a horse all the time. That was because yeah, horses were a big part of Circassian culture, obviously, because they lived on the mountains and everything. So yeah.
That's great. Okay, so this next one is a bit more creative, maybe. If it was up to you to create an image or collage of your ethnicity, so basically, if you were to visualize it, what would you like it to look like? What colors, food, practices, things can you think of that would represent this for you?
Okay, so for me, the colors would probably be green and red and silver. And the
Okay,
green and red are because the flag of Abkhazia is those colors.
okay,
It's kind of, well, it's still a place and it has its own flag.
yeah,
It's kind of close to Georgia. Yeah, it's in South Caucasus. And it only has a population of 200-ish thousand
oh
people.
wow,
But I would really like to go there to just know where my ancestors lived.
yeah.
Um, and sorry, I'm straying a bit away
It's
from the
okay.
question.
No, no, no,
And
that's
then,
fine.
yeah, the silver I would just add because of that ring that I have, and
Yeah,
just looking up the traditional clothes that they used to wear. There
yeah,
just seems to be a lot of like silver, and also in weapons and everything,
okay.
swords or whatever they used. Um, and then for food, I would definitely, if I had to pick one, I would choose hinkal just because that's my favorite. It's really delicious. And I hope I can learn how to make it someday. And then what was the other thing you said?
I think, yeah, food or
Oh,
practices.
practices. I do know that people from Caucasus have a lot of traditional dances. There is a
Yeah.
Circassian association, like a
Oh, okay.
Circassian association
Yeah,
in Turkey, and
yeah,
they kind of take it upon themselves to, I mean, you can have, for example, language lessons,
yeah.
and they also do these events where they have the dances and
Mm-hmm.
everything. And so maybe like a traditional dance could be cool, I think.
Okay. Now this might be like I don't know, wrong of me to ask. I don't know the right word because I don't know much about like traditional Turkish folk dance either.
Yeah.
But I remember at one point in lunch a few days ago when a group of us were sitting, you guys were talking about how you take folk dances lessons or like almost everyone has done folk dancing. Oh wait, you weren't there.
No.
But basically the group was talking about folk dancing lessons and how
Yeah.
almost everyone takes them when they're a kid in school.
Yeah.
Are these a part of it or did you not know? Like how
Uh,
did you learn about
Well, I only know because I researched it. I know there's an
Okay.
association in Turkey and that they do events, but also that's also more geared towards Adiga Circassian,
Okay.
so it's a little bit different. Um, but I can't say that I ever learned traditional dances growing up. I
Okay.
think it depends on the school, but I do know it's pretty common in
Okay.
Turkey. So
Okay. Like folk dancing?
yeah, folk dancing,
Yeah,
Turkish
okay.
folk dancing.
So we know that history has a way of being biased, that often the things that are recorded and the narrations that we see in records, I guess, they're influenced by different power structures. So I think when we think of the way even we learn about history in school, like for me, the way I learned this is like my Pakistan studies teacher in high school. After every lesson, or like at least every week, he would give us the lesson. He'd teach us from the book, but he would tell us like, girls, remember, whatever you learn about history from these books, it's from one perspective, and it's not even written by someone who is Pakistani. Because should I mention this? I mean, I did grow up and study in Pakistan, but I gave like GCSEs, I think.
Yeah,
So it was like the British education
yeah.
system and certain approved books and whatnot. So when you think of that, and think of the institutions that you sort of grew up through, like maybe school or education and whatnot, can you recall any time that you learned about maybe different ethnicities, minorities, or your own ethnicity in school?
Yeah, so I had a very traditional Turkish historical education background, I guess,
Okay.
because while I did study IGCSE and IB in high school, um, the Turkish education system has certain standards and just the Turkish history, I mean, the history classes that I used to take
Yeah.
were just based off of the Turkish education system. It was
Okay.
very much the exact same thing they teach in every single school. It had no affiliation with the IB or IGCSE, or so not IB level history or anything like that. So
Okay.
our textbooks, everything, it was all issued by the Turkish education. Uh, the
Yeah, it's system. Well,
yeah, yeah.
the board,
Yeah, the
whatever.
Board of Turkish Education. And so I actually don't think we ever learned about Circassians. I think when we were talking about different minorities that lived in the Ottoman Empire,
Yeah.
they did mention them. They said, oh, okay, so they were Circassians or other kind of minorities. But that was pretty much it. I didn't know
Okay.
anything about the history. I didn't know about the genocide against Circassians, um, the Russians carried out, or anything,
Yeah.
um, until I found that out on my own,
Okay.
because it's just kind of skipped over because it's all focused on Turkish history, and I mean they did live in Ottoman Empire afterwards, but it's not really a part of the curriculum.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Um, okay. I think this has been lovely. And to bring this to a close, I thought one nice way of ending it could be I hope that somewhere out there is someone who is younger than us listening to this, and someone who is older than us listening to this. So, in a way, maybe this will be good for them too. But right now, in this present moment, what is the one thing regarding, ethnicity, culture, or identity in general that you yourself had to explore? What is the one thing that you'd say to your younger self? And what is one advice that you'd like to give to your future self?
okay, so to my younger self, I would say don't be embarrassed by your background. I mean, enjoy your food. Don't feel weird because the things you eat are different from other people, or other people think the food your mom makes is strange.
Oh my
um,
god.
and yeah, just listen to the stories that your parents tell you about your elders and about your ancestors. I mean, I think I definitely didn't think it was important, or I didn't care about it that much because it wasn't anything we learned in school, and I didn't really see the bearing it would have in my
Yeah.
life, so I didn't really care. But now I definitely, um, I guess I want to feel more connected to that part of myself. So that's what I would say. And then for my future self, I would say, for advice,
Yeah.
uh, I guess do more research. Because definitely, I mean, it makes me embarrassed that I don't really know that much still. But, I feel like I'm moving at my own pace. I definitely always kind of felt like I almost don't have a right to identify with this part of myself because I'm just so removed from it. I mean, it was my mother's dad, and he married someone who was non-Circassian, so it's not really like fully connected. And then my mother was raised in that culture, but I wasn't, so I
Yeah.
don't really have, and it felt like I didn't really belong. But I mean, it was my grandfather, it was also
Yeah.
my ancestors, so I would hope that I read more about it, and I would hope that I maybe spoke to more of my relatives and just found out more.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for being my first guest.
Thank you for having me. I
And
loved
thank
your
you for
questions.
hosting. I'm glad. And to anyone who listened to this and found it interesting and hopefully also wants to be a part of our podcast, please send us a text over on our Instagram at cultbilkent. We'd love to host you and see you next time. Thank you.